It began, as it so often does in the sun-soaked suburbs of Los Angeles, with the sound of screaming. Not a scream of fear in the dark, but the raw, guttural cries of two young men stumbling from a mansion drenched in blood and privilege, pleading into the telephone, "They killed our parents. Please come quick." On the warm evening of August 20th, 1989, Lyle and Erik Menendez, sons of entertainment executive José Menendez and former beauty queen Kitty Menendez, reported a scene of unimaginable horror. They claimed to have returned from the movies to find their mother and father slain in the family's opulent Beverly Hills home. But in the coming months, the facade of the grieving, golden boy sons would shatter, revealing a story not of a random, tragic home invasion, but of a chilling, calculated execution born of greed, fear, and a lifetime of whispered secrets. This is the story of a double patricide that would captivate and horrify a nation, a tale where the crime scene was only the beginning. And the true mystery lay in the twisted psychology of the killers themselves. To understand the end, we must first understand the beginning. José Menendez was a figure of immense ambition and towering, often terrifying, presence. A Cuban exile who arrived in America with nothing, he clawed his way to the pinnacle of corporate success, becoming their top executive at RCA Records and later Live Entertainment. He was a man who demanded excellence, who saw the world in terms of winners and losers, and who was determined to sculpt his sons into his own image of success. His wife, Kitty, was a former model, elegant and image-obsessed, but often portrayed as subservient to José's domineering will. The family portrait was one of dazzling American success, a multi-million-dollar mansion on Elm Drive, luxury cars, private tennis lessons at exclusive clubs. Lyle, the elder at 21, was handsome, a student at Princeton with a sharp, calculating mind. Erik, 18, was the more sensitive one, a talented tennis player, but often seen as living in the shadow of both his father and brother. From the outside, it was a dream. But inside the gated walls, former friends and relatives would later describe a home ruled by fear, by José's volcanic temper, and by an unrelenting pressure to perform. In the immediate aftermath of the shootings, the brothers were the picture of devastated sons. They wept openly. They clung to each other. The scene itself was brutal, almost overkill. José Menendez was shot point-blank in the back of the head with a 12-gauge shotgun as he reclined in his favorite leather chair, watching television. Kitty Menendez was shot multiple times as she fled toward the hallway, her body found riddled with pellets. The sheer ferocity of the attack suggested a rage beyond that of a typical burglary. Yet, the initial police work was oddly myopic, perhaps swayed by the brothers' convincing performance and the family's prestigious status. The investigation initially focused on a possible mob connection, a hit related to José's business dealings. A theory emerged about a shotgun-wielding assailant hiding in the bushes. But the pieces didn't fit. No valuables were taken. There was no sign of forced entry. And then there was the timeline. Lyle's alibi that he and Erik were at the cinema began to crumble under scrutiny. A ticket stub found in his car was for a movie that started after the estimated time of the murders. For 6 months, the case grew cold, a haunting, high-profile mystery. Then a bombshell. Driven by a mounting sense of unease and a tip about the brothers' extravagant spending spree, detectives obtained a warrant to secretly record a conversation between Erik and his psychologist, Dr. Jerome Maziel. Unbeknownst to Erik, the doctor, bound by confidentiality but fearing for his own safety after the brothers had allegedly threatened him, had already gone to the police. In that taped session, Erik's voice, trembling and desperate, unspooled the truth. "We had to do it," he whispered. "We had to kill them." The privileged sons were arrested in March of 1990. The narrative the prosecution would build was stark and simple: cold-blooded murder for a $14 million inheritance. The media seized on the image of spoiled, greedy brats who slaughtered their parents to fund a life of fast cars, Rolex watches, and lavish business ventures. Lyle had, in fact, immediately begun spending, attempting to buy a restaurant and living a life of unchecked hedonism. The motive, it seemed, was as old as time: money. But at their trial in 1993, the defense, led by the formidable Leslie Abramson for Erik, presented a very different story. It was a story that would transform the case from a straightforward tale of greed into a complex, morally ambiguous psychological drama. The brothers took the stand, and for the first time, they told the world their secret. They spoke of a childhood of sustained, horrific abuse. They described José as a violent tyrant who beat them with belts, who psychologically tortured them, and who, they claimed, sexually abused Erik for years. They portrayed Kitty as a complicit, pill-addicted figure, emotionally absent and sometimes physically abusive herself. The killings, they argued, were not premeditated murder, but the desperate panicked acts of two terrified young men who believed with a twisted certainty forged in years of trauma that their parents were about to kill them to silence the abuse. Erik described a final confrontation that evening, where José threatened, "I'll kill you both." In their minds, it was kill or be killed. The shocking, graphic testimony painted a picture of a beautiful home that was, in reality, a gilded cage of terror. The trial became a national spectacle, broadcast gavel to gavel on television. The public was divided. Were these cunning, manipulative killers spinning a sob story to save their skins? Or were they profoundly damaged victims of monstrous parents whose final act was a tragic, if horrific, form of self-defense? The evidence was deeply conflicted. The prosecution pointed to the cold calculation, the purchase of the shotguns weeks before under false names, the staged crime scene, the lies, the spending. The defense pointed to the sheer brutality of the act as evidence of a panicked, emotional eruption, not a cool-headed hit. They presented witnesses who corroborated aspects of the abuse, who spoke of José's controlling nature and the brothers' fear. The case hinged on whom the jury believed: the ambitious, intimidating ghost of José Menendez, or the two weeping young men in the defendant's chair. And then came a twist that would irrevocably taint the proceedings. It was revealed that Dr. Aziel, the prosecution's key witness who had recorded the damning confession, had been having an affair with his own female assistant and had allegedly used details of the case to impress her and keep her from leaving him. The defense pounced, painting him as an unethical, self-serving liar whose testimony was unreliable. This scandal, coupled with the powerful, emotive testimony of the brothers, created enough reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury. In January of 1994, after weeks of deliberation, both juries won for each brother deadlocked. The result was a mistrial. The courtroom erupted. The brothers wept with relief. It seemed the defense's narrative of abuse had won the day. The prosecution and a large portion of the public were stunned. The Menendez brothers had beaten the system, or so it appeared. But the state of California was not finished. A retrial was ordered, and this time the prosecution learned from its mistakes. Gone was the complex, dual jury setup. Gone was much of the focus on Dr. Aziel's salacious personal life. The second trial, in 1995, was a leaner, harder-hitting affair. The prosecution successfully argued to have the abuse testimony severely limited, framing it not as justification, but as a possible motive for revenge that actually strengthened the case for premeditation. They hammered relentlessly on the greed, the planning, the aftermath. The defense fought back, but the cultural moment had shifted. The public, initially sympathetic to the abuse claims, had grown weary of the brothers' perceived privilege and the seeming extravagance of their legal defense. This time, there would be no deadlock. On March 20th, 1996, the verdicts came in, guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder for both Lyle and Erik Menendez. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The saga, however, refuses to fade. Decades later, the Menendez brothers, now middle-aged men, continue to appeal their sentences, and new documentaries and podcasts periodically re-examine the evidence, often focusing on the abuse allegations with fresh intensity. Letters, family testimonies, and the unwavering advocacy of some relatives keep the debate alive. Were they monsters or victims? The shocking revelation at the heart of this case is not merely that two sons could slaughter their parents, but that the truth itself can be so hideously multifaceted, so resistant to a simple label. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of trauma, the limits of self-defense, and the dark, hidden realities that can fester behind the most perfect of facades. The shots that rang out in Beverly Hills that night killed more than 2 people. They shattered an illusion and left behind a moral puzzle that remains, to this day, unsolved. The legacy of the Menendez brothers is a permanent stain on the American dream, a grim reminder that the most dangerous secrets are often kept behind the most polished doors. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.